Cool. Hi, guys. Nice to meet some of you for the first time, and everyone else. I think I know a lot of people in the room here. So just going down the panel here, we have Juan, Diana, and Jared. So what I want to do to start today, so our topic is really about the fractured screens and how we use data and analytics to tell a cohesive story from a creative standpoint as well as a responsiveness standpoint. So I want all of our panelists to introduce themselves, and when you do so, give us a little bit of sense of how you stay up to speed with how consumers are, how audiences are consuming media across different platforms today.
Hi again. You may remember me from 2 seconds ago. So yeah, and the questions that I was answering, we really do believe in the importance of data when crafting our strategies. It's constantly evolving and we're constantly learning, so we really don't have like a defined answer in that regard, but I think that as we continue to work on these campaigns, there's a lot of exciting opportunities for us moving forward in that regard.
I'm Diana Bernstein. I oversee the video investment department at Havas Media. I've been there a little over 15 years at this point. And in terms of staying up to date, I mean, you know, as we know, screens continue to evolve, lines continue to blur, and it's coming to summits like this. It's taking meeting after meeting. It's honestly chasing my chief data officer around the office and just having him sit down with me and keep me up to date on everything that's going on, and just having conversations and having the right people in the room. You know, when I first started, it was very much TV, planning, online video, and to now sit in a room where we have people across each channel, I mean, inclusive of our creative teams as well, and just making sure that that conversation is just continuous and, you know, just pulling insights, and there might be a question that I don't think to ask that somebody else does, and it just makes me smarter, and that's really, you know, the way that myself and the company look to stay on top of everything.
Jared Lake, VP of Digital Strategy at Ocean Media. So I suppose, you know, we use a lot of traditional research tools that probably everybody here in this room uses to sort of understand consumer consumption and changes in behavior and all of that fun stuff. I think, you know, some of the ways that we've been able to action against that from an agency perspective is we've, you know, in the last couple of years, we've taken a lot more holistic approach to planning, you know, and trying to align sort of media mix and budget allocations across channel based on those consumption behaviors. But ultimately, you know, as Juan sort of highlighted earlier, you know, there's a whole host of learnings that you have to go through from a brand perspective, and you got to build a base of understanding of, you know, channel optimized creative and what works over here versus what works over there, and it takes some time to develop that. So we definitely, you know, have a philosophy of always be testing, so to speak. You know, try to build your foundation and then continually add to that foundation, you know, as things evolve.
Great, thanks everybody. So one of the things that we debate a lot at a really, really fundamental level is just how do you define video? What buckets does it fall in? How do you look at linear versus OTT versus streaming versus social? Jared, I wonder, based on what you just said, if you could comment on some of that.
Yeah, so it's a little bit challenging. There's some gray area. You know, we define video as, you know, anything that uses a video creative. The challenge that comes into play, obviously, is, you know, where I sit at Ocean Media, generally speaking, there's very little arguments, you know, if that video channel is relatable to TV, right? So if we're talking about NBC.com versus, you know, most brands or most agents, you know, that we work with understand that that sort of falls, I suppose, within our swim lane, so to speak. Where things get murky and gray is when you talk about social, YouTube, et cetera. We work with a lot of e-commerce brands, .com brands that tend to have a lot, you know, in-house teams, and so those tend to be the grayest areas. While it is video, while, you know, even if you're running video on Facebook, you know, in many cases you may have top of the funnel sort of KPIs you're optimizing to. That becomes oftentimes a discussion point with a lot of brands.
So it's less about the medium and more about...
It's more about the channel,
yeah.
at least from my perspective,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah. Diana?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, it's about the media experience and just understanding how do we find the right context that is delivered within the right content. And once we understand that and how that relates to our audience, it's figuring out which channels then are going to deliver that connection that we're looking for. And, we look at everything in terms of video and, there's definitely murky waters out there, but once you truly understand your audience and what's going to connect with them, figuring out the channels from there become a lot easier.
I just wanted to add to your point, like, it's a constantly changing environment. If you think about all the platforms that we currently work on and all the platforms that are going to be available in the next year, like if you think about all the streaming platforms that are coming up just in the next 6 to 12 months, or like the Facebook people there, like using VR and AR as possible channels of promoting your videos. And like, if you think about it just from the video game industry perspective, and they're a competitor, but it's still worth highlighting, Fortnite could be seen as a channel nowadays because of how much people are engaging with that game and how people are consuming that game. If you think about, they've run promotions with Batman, with the Avengers, like they even had a Dead Mouse concert. So like there is a possibility that media and video as we understand it nowadays will be radically different in 5 years from now.
Yeah, I think you have a good point. The next 6 months, if we've seen change in the industry, the next 6 months from a video and content perspective is definitely going to shake things up a little bit more.
And the shift in time spent for non-ad supported versus ad supported. Like clearly there's a huge rush of new services that are non-ad supported, and if people spend time there, there's less time over here to be able to reach them. Yeah.
So how are you planning in advance for that?
It's tough. I've sat on panels similar to this one, and I think and talked about this. I think the reality is it's incumbent upon the advertiser or the agency to work harder in that environment. Quite obviously, like the reality is Netflix has always taken time away. There's only so much time in a day. You can only consume so much video. Netflix has been garnering a larger share of that as you add in Disney Plus and whatever else. Like that the time of day that someone's interacting with ad-supported video channels is obviously shrinking. That means as advertisers, we're going to have to work even harder to make that messaging resonate and be relevant and reach the right audience at the right time and all that fun stuff.
Or be even more creative with how we associate ourselves with that type of content.
From an integrations perspective?
Integrations or, any creative standpoint.
Yeah, 100%. That's a very challenging nut to crack, so to speak. It also requires significant lead times, you guys, I'm sure, do a lot of that.
Yeah, I mean, a great example, and I'm not here to talk about PepsiCo, but with Mountain Dew, getting into Game of Thrones, a non-ad supported content that was obviously really deep into the culture, and Mountain Dew is a brand that really tries to stay connected into its fans, and the integrations and the partnership that we did with Game of Thrones was really actually quite phenomenal.
And how much lead time did that require, like from inception to reality?
Yeah, well, so that's a good question. I think in what we were doing, it was lead up to the finale, so we knew, there's some things that you can prepare for, especially from a cultural standpoint. You look at planning different moments throughout the year, how you connect to your consumers, and what are the cultural events that are coming up that year. Like, we know every year there's probably going to be a Super Bowl. We know every 4 years there's probably going to be the Olympics. So getting into that in advance, the marketers who are really on the cutting edge are always constantly thinking about how they can integrate further into society and into culture. But Juan, you mentioned in your speech before about putting audience first. Can you talk a little bit about the balance of putting audience first while at the same time trying to combat this fractured screen environment where you want to reach the right people at the right time, but you also need to ensure that you have scale and the right cost structure to make that an efficient way to connect with people? people.
Yeah, and I think connecting it to the previous comment that you were making about we know the big events that are going to be happening through any given year. So like whenever we try to go for that mass reach, we do try to align ourselves with those tentpole moments because we know that audiences are going to be very lean into those. Like whether it's an NBA game or like the Super Bowl or you use the Olympics. I was going to use the World Cup because I'm more into soccer, but it still applies.
Olympics has soccer as well.
I mean, we're not going to debate that. This is not the panel for that. But to your point of putting audiences first, it kind of connects to understanding, again, how audiences really engage with content. Because if you think about, we try to cater to a younger demographic, right? We go after Gen Z, and the 18 to 34 are still a very big segment, but we are trying to kind of like broaden our approach to younger audiences because they are going to be the future gamers that we really kind of like trying to bring into our titles. So if you think about how those audiences can be very defensive when it comes to ad, it kind of like gives you an answer as to why we really do work with influencers and those voices that are passionate about and knowledgeable about the titles that we work on.
You have to be authentic, and you have to
Exactly.
have permission to be in the channel and in the spaces that they're...
Yeah, nothing's gonna throw you off as Ninja trying to tell you the oil run is awesome when like it's not coming from him.
Yep. Diana, do you...
I mean, I think it's also how we define efficiency. Coming from a traditional TV background where I started, a lot of that was, you know, a legacy CPM for linear television. And you get to a point in utilizing TV for that mass reach where getting that incremental reach point becomes costly. So when you're looking at something based on, you know, a CPM alone, alternative screens, you know, and alternative ways of reaching that audience might seem a bit more, you know, a bit less efficient. But the reality is how much budget goes against that higher cost, you know, CPM versus how much you have to put into that linear aspect in order just to get that one incremental reach point that you can find on the second screen, the third screen. So I think it's also changing that conversation, and when you're having that conversation with clients who are still using that traditional media mix model, it's a challenge, but it's something that we're going to continue to have and push clients forward because, you know, as everyone's been stating here, the time spent with ad-supported TV is, you know, it's going to be less and less, and we need to find those ways of flipping that conversation.
But I think, so that point goes back to our earlier comment about how to bucket the different channels and the roles of the media, because obviously you're doing that in part so you can then measure and understand what channel or what medium is the most effective. So the definition of what TV is or what video is, what linear versus premium, all comes down to what's the performance of that. So you can really bucket anything any way you want to mess with the math, but to your point, how do you do so and then develop the most effective and efficient plan from a measurement standpoint as well?
Yeah, correct. I mean, because if you continue hitting that same audience, I mean, we all hear about within the linear bucket how it's the heavy TV viewer that's there. So if you continue to hit that same audience over and over again, is that really an effective efficiency as, you know, versus switching that budget into another area and then just putting all those pieces together to come out to something that just makes sense and moves product?
I think it goes without saying that there are significant challenges when it comes to measurement. And there are also two types of measurement. We have delivery.
Your mic's not on, sorry. I don't know if you turned it off or if it's...
I didn't touch it. No. It's dead. Battery's dead.
Sorry about that.
Oh, that's much better. So, I mean,
But that was a very good point. Everyone
yeah,
knows this.
yeah. Thank you. I try to make good points. Yeah, so measurement's a challenge, and you have two types of measurement, or at least from our perspective, we look at obviously delivery and all the things that Nielsen can do, and planning against incremental reach, and sort of measuring against incremental reach, and I think we do a lot of the same in terms of balancing that cost per incremental reach point, and certainly digital channels do a great job of achieving that. The real challenge is when it gets down to sort of attribution and you're trying to sort of stack TV and a cost per this or an ROI that versus digital that and cost per an ROI, and And that becomes extremely challenging because obviously there's not a unified sort of measurement tool that exists for each of those two environments that can allow you to compare them apples to apples, you know, from a black and white perspective, right? And so then, you know, at least my experience is that then you get down the road of, you know, modeling and, you know, data science, fancy stuff, and it gets very, very murky from there. And you can kind of choose your own adventure in terms of like what answer you like.
Well, yeah, that was my point before. You can bucket the channels and the exposure in any way you want, really. But to what end? So to what end? How do you
To serve your particular
Well,
bias.
Of course not. But to that point, how do you, you know, I think we talked about aligning the role of the media channel to its place in a media plan. Diana, can you talk a little bit about how you understand or define the specific role that each individual channel has in the overarching holistic approach to planning?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, you know, it's obviously very client dependent, and the key for us is, you know, from the starting point is just understanding what are we trying to solve for? What does success look like for this campaign? Understanding what assets we have, understanding who our audience is and how they're consuming media, and then figuring out our starting place. You know, is our foundation going to be linear television, or are we working with a client who's looking to reach the younger audience, or a client who might not have as much money to really be effective in the linear TV space? And then that starting point becomes somewhere else. It might be OTT, it might be addressable, it might be digital, and it's really just understanding what you're trying to solve for and then figuring out how you utilize those channels and what assets you have, and, you know, to be totally honest, what budget you have sometimes.
So do you typically have a lead channel that you go against, and then use the other platforms as supporting, or do you go in zero base always?
Again, I would say client dependent. You know, we do try to define what is that foundation, and then how do we build from there. You know, I feel like if you're just kind of pulling from all different areas, it kind of gets sloppy when you put it together, and it's a lot harder to explain to a client, you know, here's your plan if you're not defining each channel and what it is going to serve. You know, even to the point of measurement, there's not unified measurement. So it's defining the channels that are going to work and putting measurement against each, and then saying, okay, at the end of this campaign, I will show you success against this channel, and trying to bring it together into a 360 story without having that total unified measurement available to you.
Jared, do you have comments on that?
No, it's tough. I mean, the reality
Your
is,
mic is working now.
Yeah. You know, when it comes to planning, the first and most important choice that you make is what represents your base, right? And that's going to dictate to a large degree, if you're using sort of reach planning tools and Nielsen tools and all this other kind of stuff, you know, what channel gets a lion's share of your budget. You know, if that base is based off a high reach sort of channel. So if you start with cable TV, the majority of your budget is going to go to cable TV. If you start with online video or Facebook or YouTube, the majority of your budget is going to end up going to online video, Facebook or YouTube.
Well, assuming reach is your end goal.
Assuming reach is your goal, yes.
Yeah. Juan, do you have a client perspective on that?
No, I was just gonna say, like, to your point of really defining what the objective is, and to kind of like continue from what you were saying, really understanding the benchmarks of the different channels that you're gonna be working on, because like what works well on digital might not necessarily work well on digital TV. And if you think about how different our audiences are, and how kind of like we have to really understand that just because you play The Sims doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna play Madden. So our strategies have to be like very targeted to the who we're going after. So really kind of like bringing it all together and understanding, okay, we have this one objective of effectively reaching our audiences, but again, I'm kind of like quoting myself, one size does not fit all. That was a good plug.
Yeah, one of the things that we focus on is obviously defining that mix from a planning exercise perspective, and then given the measurement challenges of understanding channel A versus channel B, you know, obviously a near-term sort of simplified solution to that is to optimize within channel, right? So You decide that, you know, you need cable TV, broadcast TV, Facebook, YouTube, whatever else on your plan. You know, most agencies have the tools to optimize within those things. And then, you know, you can figure out over time if you need to move budget out of one versus the other.
And that's the balance between
Yeah.
mix modeling and attribution, which I think can get us down to a dirty data path. So let's bring it back up into the fun world of marketing and the opportunities that exist in this fractured world. So OTT, connected TVs, we have more opportunity than ever before to be really creative in how we connect with consumers and leverage our brand messages. Diana, can you talk about something that your agency has done that you're super proud of, or that, you know, kind of couldn't have been done a couple years ago based on the capabilities from OTT or connected TVs today?
Yeah, I mean, I think the interactive feature that you have the ability to work within OTT and connected TV, you know, we have some Spirits clients who love it, right? They love using that to push extended content, to push drink recipes. You know, we have another QSR client who uses it to showcase product and to drive download apps, and we see the engagement there. You know, we see people who are utilizing the feature and they're coming back, and we've really seen success there, and it allows us to tell that story past a 15, past a 30, and get users to take action and, you know, drive them a little bit closer down the funnel than what we're able to do with traditional television.
And I imagine balancing the fun or the connected aspect or the engagement aspect with the higher cost that comes with it is also another interesting conversation that agencies have to have. Jared, do you guys internally debate that how connected do you want to be to your consumer, while at the same point, is it worth the increased CPM to do so?
Yeah, so when it comes to, I guess, CTV or OTT or whatever acronym you want to use against it, you know, what we've found from a cost perspective, you know, in many cases it can be more expensive than certainly cable TV, right? So you have to sort of balance that a bit. And what we've found, we've done a lot of, you know, measurement studies, as I'm sure many people in this room have, and, you know, one of the encouraging outcomes that we found is we're seeing that the audiences in that environment typically tend to be more responsive. You know, not clear if that's just because it's a smaller concentration of higher value people. You know, people who tend to stream or content are generally younger, generally more affluent from a household perspective, and so that may obviously be impacting what we see in terms of response rates and conversion. But that has been, I guess, one of the, lights at the end of the tunnel that we've seen in the last couple of years to help sort of motivate brands to invest more in that channel. Because again, from some of the measurement aspects from a Nielsen perspective have handicapped that, but to be able to say that you're getting a higher value customer and you're getting people to respond at a higher rate than you've traditionally seen on TV, that's obviously valuable.
Well, and the fact that they can respond.
Exactly.
I mean, you can measure that. You can actually, in real time, identify what the engagement is, however you're defining that engagement. Juan, do you have a?
Yeah, no.
You can quote yourself from
No,
your
no.
presentation.
that was once and one time only. But like, no, I completely understand that. To your point, like, one of the benefits of OTT is really kind of like being able to peek under the hood and really understand what's working and what's not, because we do have those metrics. We do have like an understanding of how audiences are engaging and reacting to the content that we're putting in front of them. So I think that's one of the biggest benefits of OTT and addressable TV that really kind of like, again, continue to evolve as we move forward into the future.
So I think there's a number of partners here in the room, and any one of us can craft a media plan together just with the people that are present at this conference, which is great. But how do you guys sift through some of the noise that exists? So how do you identify who it is that you want to partner with? Jared, you mentioned, you know, it's very much a culture of testing. And at PepsiCo, we have the same model. I think many companies do. At what point does testing become just testing for continuous sake, as opposed to this is the partner that I'm landing on, and here's the reason why?
Yeah, so I would say that our emphasis from a testing perspective is testing, I guess, within channel, so to speak. You know, so if I've already identified that YouTube is great for this particular brand or Facebook or whatever, then I'm going to continue to optimize and tweak that until I'm like blue in the face. Like that's just going to be an ongoing thing. We're going to allocate some budget to it and go after it. When it comes to testing new partners, you know, from an ad tech perspective, we are very deliberate when it comes to that, because that can be you know, it's an investment in time, money, and resources from an agency perspective. As everyone in this room understands this dynamic, there's a lot of sort of, you know, overlap in sort of the marketplace in terms of what, you know, partner A can provide versus partner B. And so, you know, we test very few partners, quite frankly, on an annual basis. And we spend the majority of our time testing and optimizing, you know, with those key partners that we've already established.
One thing that I wanted to add here is that, and repeating myself again, but really understanding where your audiences are, because if you think, when mentioning going and really engaging with younger audiences, like a platform like TikTok was an opportunity that really came about this year. Like if you were to ask this group of people what TikTok was last year, probably a lot of question marks and like, I don't know what that is. But like this year, like seeing how that platform has really kind of like come into the spotlight and really make a big impact, I think that you have to be deliberate, but you also have to understand where opportunity resides, because like new partners and new opportunities do come up very often, and like there seems to be a new player every other week. But really understanding again how your audiences are really engaging with those platforms is what will give you the answer of, is this a good idea for a campaign or not?
Yeah.
And TikTok deserves a spot at the top of that list, right? They've come out of nowhere. They have a huge audience. Makes sense.
Exactly.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me, and I'm dating myself a bit, but like 10 years ago, there were so many new social platforms and partners out there, and I just remember like every month there was someone new, and just in my head thinking, no, I'm not really going to pay attention to them. They're not going to be here in 2 or 3 months. And I think we've passed that point to the extent that it was 5, 10 years ago, and the marketplace has solidified to some degree. But there's obviously innovation, people like TikTok and Quibi coming out to develop really new partners. Are we out of time?
Well, I'd love to give everyone, you guys have so much information, I'd love to give everyone else a chance to ask some questions,
Sure.
not just you. So.
Great.
But unless, did you have any like big question that you wanted to sort of end with?
Well, now the pressure is on.
No biggie.
Yeah. So if you were to really think about the spend in the marketplace from a video standpoint, where would you think, just really broad answer, up or down, what platforms and media channels do you think are going to be going up in the next 2 years, and which ones I think will continue to go down?
I mean, I'll start. So what we're already seeing and what I expect to see for the next, couple of years at the very least is, CTV and OTT or however you want to describe it. That's where we had our largest growth in terms of media investment year over year. And that train seems to be continuing down the track.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. It's the same area that we see, and it's really, there's just so much opportunity there, and so much opportunity across every client that we have under the hood. There's an opportunity to take advantage of that space.
I'm just to not repeat what they said, but like on a personal level, I'm very excited to see what experiences like VR will be able to bring to the table, just because if you think about how that works and how immersive you can make your video creative in a VR, I think there's a lot of potential there. We're not quite there yet, but I am very excited to see what that looks like.
All right, well, now let's open it up to everyone. Any questions? We had so much, I cut you off. I'd like to ask, we got you.
Hi guys, thanks for the time. I had a quick question. Jared, you just mentioned that the perception from you, and I would assume from others, is it fair to say the general perception right now in media buying is that ad tech, wide swath, you have an ad tech, whatever you are, has a lot of overlap? That there's not like, oh, it's a new ad tech thing, they've got something new. It's like they probably have something similar to 10 other places that we may or may not be doing. and that that's a true statement that ad tech is generally like it's another thing that probably exists somewhere else that we're doing. Yet the channels are more exciting, like Twitch, like these emerging channels, which are not like it's an emerging ad thingamajig. It's an emerging channel that people care about, and the assumption is, well, obviously they're going to monetize themselves by advertising, so that's where we're headed. That sort of channel way more interesting than some new development in technology that will help advertising grease the wheels of that channel.
Yeah, so it's not as if we don't look at ad tech, just to clarify. And when I say we focus on channel optimization, we're really primarily focused on optimizing and testing within the channels that we're already using, while also looking at emerging things like TikTok. But what I challenge my team with is when they meet with or they talk to someone, a new sort of a new company in the ad tech space, or even an existing company that's new to them or new to us, is to really vet that and understand like what is their core competency, what are they bringing to market, how does it fit in with sort of our current operations and all that kind of fun stuff, and to, if they can, obviously identify the point of differentiation. I think what I see is that when you really sort of try to peel the layers off the onion, unfortunately, there's oftentimes not a lot of differentiation between a lot of ad tech partners.
Joe Mandisi from Mediapost. So you all spoke about the importance of using data. Juan, all of you addressed it. As you're growing your use of connected TV technology, and even with new things like TikTok, are you putting in place new protocols to safeguard consumer data, and or are you treating it like you treated access to any data? It's not your responsibility. Can you talk about what your due diligence is in using data that the consumers may not be aware is being gathered?
Silence.
Yeah, I mean, that might be better for our chief data officer to answer, but I mean, it's obviously something we take very seriously. As an agency, we just went through, and we continuing to go through a vendor RFI process, and there's a lot of questions within that RFI that does ask about data and making sure that we're working with partners that are taking data as serious as we are to make sure that everything is compliant and that we are looking out for those audiences that are consuming data and making sure that it's as compliant as everything needs to be.
All right, well, on that note, we
One
can,
more?
oh, we do have one more.
One more?
I thought you were waving to say no more. We have one more.
Hi, I'm Mark Roplat from Tubi. Jared, you mentioned some of the gaps in measurement, and I just wondered, how do you then handle that? How do you address where you've got some ambiguity?
Yeah, so we've spent a lot of time. So what my focus has been in the last 12 months or so is figuring out CTV measurement. As I'm sure everyone here understands, Google has yet to add those sort of devices to their device graph, making sort of measurement from a pure, traditional digital perspective and attribution, impossible. So we've tested that. That has been our investment in time from an ad tech perspective. We've tested quite a few people in the last 12 months that are offering, device graphs and measurement solutions for connected device. Obviously a lot of people, bundle that with services from a buying perspective, whether it's managed service or self-serve DSP. We've identified a couple that we feel reasonably confident with, but that's been a big focus, and that's from my perspective, a vacuum in the ecosystem. Not to get too complex, but if you start to dig into some of those solutions, the reality is the connected device ecosystem is not using any sort of device ID standardization. It's mostly IP-based matching. There's all kinds of inherent sort of challenges or issues with that, privacy stuff. It's a giant kind of cluster. But brands need an answer. Agencies need an answer. We need to be able to sort of justify investments in these channels. We need to get some answers. We need to be able to understand what's working versus what's not to help, inform how we continue to, optimize our budgets.
And anyone else? I acted, but you had a question earlier for Juan. Did you? We. I did, but it was very specific to Juan's business. Oh, okay. So you guys can talk later.
We can connect later.
He's willing to talk.
Sure, yeah. My name is Jesse Math from Forward PMX, and I think maybe also a tough question, one that I struggle with. But so you're talking about planning across video options and channels. Is a view everywhere? Do you value a video completion in one place more than another, whether it's broadcast or YouTube, or is it really just about making sure that an audience sees the video?
I do not, right? I think like the value of a view in, let's take Facebook for instance. If you calculate the cost per completed view on Facebook, if it's based off of 100% completed view, not 3 seconds or 10 seconds or whatever, that cost per completed view on Facebook is going to be significantly higher than a cost per completed view on YouTube or a cost per completed view on CTV. The difference with Facebook is that if somebody actually gets to the end of that video, they are highly engaged and focused on your brand, and they're much more likely to convert after sort of viewing that whole video. So if you compare the cost per completed view on Facebook versus something else, you're inherently not going to spend money there, and that might be a mistake.
Yeah, and I completely agree that, just to your point, like, I don't think a view is just a view, because like, if we count impressions and, oh, we got impressions and we won. Like, it's not that simple, right? Like, is your creative resonating? Is it making an impact? Is it helping, like, really elevate your brand? Because, like, if we think about the exercise of what we try to do, like, what we're trying to do is create brand awareness, right? Like, whether it's to drive ROI or to really kind of, like, just create awareness of a product or service, like, you really have to be very methodical, very understanding of the impact that your media has, and to just simplify things as, oh, we got views, you're kind of like losing the objective of what the campaign is trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking to find a meaningful view, right? Something that's resonating, something that the audience is leaning into, something that is going to eventually cause them to take action. And, if we're just considering things to be a view, we'd be buying on People 2+ or Household, right? It's just about getting someone to see the ad. We're looking for something that's engaging and it's meaningful to that audience.
Okay, well, I think we're going to take about a 10-minute break and just get coffee, water, do whatever you need to do.